So far we have looked at equivalence in translation beginning from equivalence at word level, equivalence above word level, and today we dealt with grammatical equivalence. This next part of our presentation will act as a bridge between the components that have been discussed separately previously, and the same components within a bigger frame, which is textual equivalence. An important issue that we must discuss briefly is word order in languages. Since we are going to discuss textual equivalence, that in itself covers how smaller units operate within a language amongst themselves in contrast to another language. The syntax of a language imposes how messages can be organized in that language, meaning that even though it may seem very appealing to a lot of people to use the expression أغلق الباب من طرف محمد, it is still not allowed in Arabic syntax since the doer of an action must not be included in a passive sentence in Arabic. Therefore, the only way to mention Muhammad is by using an active structure such as أغلق محمد الباب. Now, even though the syntax of a language determines how a message must be structured, not all languages have the same level of restriction when it comes to structure. Basically, in languages such as Arabic, Russian, and German, the order of words may be flexible, meaning that the same word can convey the exact meaning when placed in different positions in the sentence. To illustrate more, please take a look at this Quranic verse. إِنَّمَا يَخْشَى اللَّهَ مِنْ عِبَادِهِ الْعُلَمَاءُ. Therefore, Arabic accepts in many cases the exchange of different components in sentences with the condition of manipulating Arabic diacritics. This is opposed to English and Chinese, where the position of words decides their meaning and they cannot move from one position to another without changing it. Consider the following example. Kevin ate the fish, and the fish ate Kevin. Case inflection is also a characteristic that exists in certain languages and not in others. This means that a certain relationship exists between the elements of a sentence. For instance, who does what to whom. Consider the following example from Arabic. أكل محمد التفاحة. محمد أكل التفاحة. Even though the order changed, we still know that Muhammad ate the apple and not any other way. The languages that have a more elaborate use of case inflection tend to call structure variation a matter of stylistic choices that are used to deliver different meanings in different styles. Generally, word order assists in maintaining a coherent point of view and in orienting messages at text level. Before we move to textual equivalence, let us first see what is a text and why don't we just call it a set of unrelated words. As was mentioned before, we looked at separate entities of language, each on their own. Now we need to take a broader look at language. We have to consider the possibility that lexical and grammatical components have meaning in communicative events. These communicative events are called texts. Following Brown and Joe, text is defined here as the verbal record of a communicative event. It is an instance of language in use rather than language as an abstract system of meanings and relations. To illustrate, let's look at text versus non-text. Halliday and Hassan see that if we exclude poets and prose writers who deliberately set out to create non-texts, the only case in which we can find non-texts is probably in younger children's speech or bad translations. When translating, we see lexical and grammatical items, but similarly look at the text which carries them as one whole unit. After understanding a text, the translator must go about the process of reproducing the same message in the target language, depending on the type of text and the purpose which is required from the commissioner. The problem is that sometimes, even when phrases and collocations and grammatical patterns conform with the target language, the message still seems clumsy, or worse, unreadable by the target audience. So these might construct meaning on their own, but might as well not add up to each other or between the sentences of a text. A text therefore has features of organization that differentiate it from random sentences and paragraphs put together. What is more interesting is that even these features organization are culture specific, and every community has its own. Thus, a text might seem correct lexically and grammatically, yet at the same time feel strange to a target community. These features of organization are then manipulated by a translator and exchanged for equivalent ones in his translations, so as to produce a text that can stand on its own and feel as it was produced in the target language. We now move on to explain what is features of text organization. Any text, no matter the kind, exhibits certain linguistic features in order for us to call it a text. When a text is presented to us, we partially perceive it as a text because it is presented to us as such, and partially because of the connections we find between its sentences and paragraphs. These connections can be the arrangement of information within each clause and the way this relates to the arrangement of information in preceding and following clauses and sentences. Surface connections, which establish interrelationships between persons and events. Underlying semantic connections. Another feature of text organization is text type or genre. Here we can speak of two classifications. The first is based on the contexts in which texts occur and results in institutionalized labels, such as journal article, science textbook, and newspaper editorial. The second is a more subjective, less institutionalized, and therefore much vaguer classification, which does not normally apply to a whole text but rather to parts of it. And these include narration, exposition, argumentation, and instruction. Both of these types of classification are useful to define translation problems and to justify specific strategies to overcome them.